The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies of all time. So I'm super glad that I got to be exploring these movies with this series. Now, I have watched The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit on repeat probably once every year. My dad and my mom read me the books when I was younger, and so it's always held a very special place in my heart. But I had no idea that these movies contain so many leadership lessons. They can be general, and they also can be advanced. They cover basic and advanced. It's really cool, actually. I didn't know they were there until I started watching them for this series, and I saw things that I had never seen before. In this video, we're going to cover 3 principles, one of which is basics, so memorize, 2 of which are advanced. If you're new to the channel, hi, I'm Jeremiah. I have been in several leadership positions through various times in my life ever since I was a teenager. I've been a lifeguard, camp counselor, I was briefly a camp runner, I have hosted lots of church events, I'm a polar dipper, I've organized lots of war games, you name it. And I also happen to love TV. And I realized that there were some TV shows that actually contained leadership lessons that I was recognizing based on my experience. So what I decided to do with this channel is to create a bunch of videos analyzing what's happening in movies that I recognize and then map it on to real world experience. Now that we've covered all that, let's dive right in. Before we start to cover the unexpected journey, there are 3 principles that are the most singular important principles I will probably ever teach in my videos. They are: 1, win small victories. This is perfect for building influence in your group. Number 2, leadership is not about you, it's about the people under you. This is perfect to keep you in the right mindset. And number 3, master your basics. This is important. This is what's going to carry you through all your leadership trials. Remember, if you do not remember anything else from any of my videos, remember these 3. Once more, win small victories, leadership is not about you, it's about the people under you, and master your basic principles. Okay, so let's start. It begins with a pretty serious intro. Bilbo is writing down what he remembers the history of Erebor to have been. We see that the dwarves are being at peace. There's no really wars going on. They're accumulating lots of wealth. Things are going well. But then Thror, who's the king and Thorin's grandfather, starts getting sick with dragon sickness, which essentially means he's getting obsessed with his money and gold. Then the dragon attacks. His name is Smaug. He attacks the Lonely Mountain, and in what must have been in the span of like a few hours, Thorin is literally everywhere. Thorin sounds the alarm that Smaug is coming. Then when Smaug is breaking through the gates, Thorin is there leading the defenses. Then when Smaug gets into the gold, he goes back and physically rescues Thror from Smaug. Then he's leading survivors out of the mountains personally, and he tries to get elves to come and help them, which ultimately fails. This ties into the first principle. It's a basic one, so remember, memorize. It is. Leaders' responsibility is to be where the most danger or responsibility is. This may sound like an easy enough principle to implement in real life, but I promise you it's not. The closest example I think I've come to experiencing this is when I was at camp, and sometimes at church. We would play group-wide games, and most of the time this was capture the flag. There were a couple times where I ended up being team captain of a team that was about 50 to 80 people. I always felt the call or the pull to stay on the defense because I know defensive strategy better, I feel more comfortable on the defense operating that way. But the real reason I wanted to stay on the defense often is because I didn't want to get caught. I didn't want to sit out the whole game because I remember one particular game, we didn't have great runners. So when I looked around, I was like, if I go on the offense, I'm going to probably end up sitting out there because they can't rescue me. However, almost the whole team volunteered to be defense. And I realized that we didn't have enough offensive action to get the other team's flag. So I took a deep breath. Internally, I said, you're needed somewhere else. So I said, I'm going to coordinate a team to go on the offense. So I picked some people and we ran across the field. I didn't end up getting caught and I did sit most of that game out. But the people that I picked ended up getting the flag. So there's that. Obviously, capture the flag is a silly example. It's not even close to real leadership or, in Thorin's case, a literal what's the word? Life or death scenario. But even with such a small example, I had a hard time going where I felt I was needed, which was on the offense, because I wanted to stay safely behind our team line. This is a fantastic illustrator for you to remember this very basic principle. Remember, master your basics. Leaders need to be where the most danger or responsibility is. Okay, fast forward. We are now in present time. Not in the present time of when Bilbo was recording these entries, but the present time of when the Hobbit and Unexpected Journey takes place over. Gandalf, the wizard, who is a stranger, comes up to younger Bilbo and just starts aggressively questioning him. Then he decides to get, I'll switch here, he decides to get direct, and he says he's looking for someone to go on an adventure. Bilbo gets spooked and tries to run away. Gandalf says something shocking, which is essentially, I know who you are, which gets Bilbo to stay, and leads to Bilbo getting enthusiastic and remembering how amazing he felt about Gandalf's fireworks, which pleases Gandalf, which leads him again to get direct, and he says, I actually do think you're the right person for the job. In his words,
It'll be very good for you, and most amusing for me.
Bilbo again gets spooked. He runs away from the encounter. Gandalf draws a sign on the door that indicates Bilbo is the right adventurer, and then he leaves. This is an interview, plain and simple. Gandalf is questioning Bilbo because he's looking for two things. Number one, is Bilbo the right person for this job? And number two, does Bilbo even want to go on this? The fact that Bilbo expresses some kind of enthusiasm over his fireworks indicates to Gandalf that there is a spark there in Bilbo that, what's the right word? It's like he comes alive when he thinks of the wonder that Gandalf represents that he had as a kid. Something like that. So there is something in him that wants to go there. This ties into the second principle, which is look for enthusiasm. I've never personally interviewed anyone for a job position at work. It's never been my responsibility. But I have looked for people to do things for me. I have looked for people to be a partner in polar dipping, to be like an offensive runner in the capture the flag example, to do some work projects for me at home. I've had to delegate responsibility to certain people at camp before. And so I do understand what Gandalf is kind of doing here. There are a bunch of technical things you can look for and technical things to keep in mind. And mostly that's centered around job interviews. I don't care about any of that. Or, I guess if I was to care about that, that's for a different video. What Gandalf does here is he comes and he's looking for whether there's enthusiasm in Bilbo, whether there's something that lights him up, a spark somewhere. That's what I look for in people when I'm trying to give them jobs. Is this something that they're excited about? Is there a spark in there that I can latch onto and use that to get them to do the thing for me that I want them to do? Like the offensive runner. I'm looking for someone who there's a little bit of a spark in there, so I can convince them to join me on this. That's what Gandalf is looking for in Bilbo, and that's what he finds, which is why Bilbo gets chosen for the job that he gets chosen for. Remember, when you're hiring for talent, look for enthusiasm. Alright, let's jump into the next scene. So Gandalf's mark on Bilbo's door is starting to bear fruit, because Bilbo suddenly has to play host to a bunch of very large and very hairy dwarves with terrible table manners, which he doesn't like. Then the dwarves go and they're having a meeting about what to do about Erebor. I'm going to call it a public forum. It's a meeting. Public forum, meeting, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. There are essentially two factions in the dwarves. You have Thorin, who is leading the to-go party, and you have Balin, who's leading the I don't want to go party. Gandalf is on Thorin's side because he wants the dwarves to go to Erebor. This is where what I said earlier about winning small victories comes into play. Because when you win small victories, that's how you gain influence. Winning small victories is you win conversations, you win meetings. Thorin's goal to win a small victory is to rally the dwarves behind him and get the mission going forward. Balin's goal to gain a small victory is to convince the rest of the dwarves that this is a bad idea and put the brakes on the mission. Now, if we take a look at Thorin, there are a couple things that he's doing to control the meeting. And do not be confused, he is controlling this meeting, and he's doing it deliberately, which is why people who say Thorin's an idiot in these movies, I don't think are really paying attention, because he's controlling this meeting with a lot of savvy. That's the right term for it. He's doing three things. One, he's letting Dwalin and Gandalf argue his point for him against Balin and basically fight over with the factions. Number two, he lets the dwarves argue amongst themselves, and I guess Gandalf too, argue amongst themselves without saying anything for almost the whole meeting. And number three, when he does speak, it's for a specific reason and it achieves certain aims. So if we look at the times he speaks, first time is when he's asked a question right at the beginning. Are the other dwarves coming with us? And he answers. Number two is he stands up when the meeting is starting to spiral. They're starting to fight. It's turning into like a brawl. He stands up. He yells. They all go quiet. And then he uses all of their attention to give a rousing speech and get the dwarves on his side, which is winning a small victory in this council meeting. And the third is after some more arguing has happened, Gandalf is trying to persuade him to bring Bilbo on as a burglar. Thorin thinks about it for a while, and then he says yes. They give the contract, the meeting's done. This ties into the third principle, which is speak strategically. When you're running a public forum or a meeting, you have two objectives. One, you want group-wide consensus to form a plan because you don't have one. Or number two, you want to get the rest of the group on board with what your plan is. I'm going to assume for this video that your goal is number two. Thorin is doing this. Even though it's not exactly clear, he's controlling the meeting, he's making sure what he says has impact, and he wins a small victory over Balin, and the group gets moved into a position where they're ready to go to Erebor. And so he wins some influence there. I have a little bit of experience with this because in the past 4 months, me and my family sold everything we owned, and with my parents and 2 of my 3 younger siblings, I moved out east to Nova Scotia from Alberta. The reason? We're trying to help my dad's parents fix their lives. Fix their house, put their house in order, get rid of a bunch of junk, fix their relationships, basically dig them out of the crappy life they've dug for themselves. Because we want to help them. We've learned things and we want to help them. But they have a different vision for what they want their house than we see they need to happen. So that means we're often butting heads. However, luckily, me, my dad, and my mom are often on the same page about what we want. This means we're often in meetings with my grandparents about what's supposed to get done. And really the point of what we're talking to them about is to get them on board with our ideas. Sometimes I have to remember that they have good ideas too, and whatever, that's a digression. But I'm often in meetings, and I get to watch this firsthand because my dad is really good at talking to them because he's their son, he grew up with them, he knows how they tick. So he talks to them, and this leaves me and my mother free to watch what's happening in the group at large, which means because I'm not speaking, I can see if something hits my grandparents particularly hard, or if one of them's nodding off, or if mom is starting to get distracted, or if something was just said that needs to be reiterated. Also, there's the advantage that because I don't say as much, my words carry more of an impact. Remember, when you're in a public forum and you want to control the meeting, speak strategically. Okay, let's sum up what the principles are. We have number 1, which is a basic, so memorize. The leader's responsibility is to go where is the most danger or responsibility. Number 2, look for enthusiasm when you're hiring. And number 3, when you're in a public forum, speak strategically. Okay, that wraps up this video. Have you ever been in a meeting where you noticed that there were different ways that worked? Have you ever successfully controlled a meeting? What were the contents and what was that about? Comment down below what your answer is. I hope you'll join me for the next episode in this series. Like and subscribe, and remember, we're doing this so that you can learn how to become the leader you were always born to be. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Take up arms. Fight! Fight!